we started with the operation contract, service contract and all. So here, as soon as we create a WCF service layer, right, we can see that we have a service, auto service got created, which is whose name is service one, right? So if you want to create your own service, right, you can do that. So for that, you can right click on your WCF service layer, click on add here, right? So go to new item, and here in your let's say C# code, you will see something called WCF service. So as soon as you create WCF service, right, it will create again two. One is an interface class, which is an iService1 type. You can give your own name, and the second one is your service1.svc, which is your actual service, which contains a service class, right? So the interface is something which is a main, actual service contract which we design, and then using this interface we normally create our service class. So whatever we actually create, all the operation contracts, whatever we have in here, right? So will be used for our will be actually used for other steps, right? So we'll actually see how it actually gets. What are the different contracts here? The first contract you can see is a service contract. So service contract is something where we are actually mentioning our main interface, right, which contains all the operation contracts, and you can have, right, for each service you can have one service contract, right? So which will define how or what web methods you will have in that service. So as soon as you define operation contract is nothing but your operations. If you remember, our interfaces contains all operations, right, without any body. It will be just declaration, your method name, your output type, and you have your argument. So only these things will be there, which is your operation contract. So in this way, you can create any number of operation contracts you want. An interface can have only operations, right? You cannot have methods which can have body. That is your operation contract, right? Now, so when we go back here, right, you can see that, so if you take the first operation contract, you can see it's a simple operation or method name called getData, which returns a normal data type, which also accepts a normal data type, which is an int value. Fine. Now, when you see the next operation contract, right, you can see this operation contract is actually returning an object type, which means this is returning a separate class type, which is a user-defined class. So in order to make use of user-defined class as a input or output of your operation contract, right? So that class should be a data contract class. Now, why do we have to use data contract? Because your data contract classes, actually these classes, whenever you are returning your object, right? So this object should go through your service buffer, right? And should go to the application layer. Now, whenever you are passing some data through the network, right? So we have to use something called serialization, which is system.runtime.serialization. So this will take care of serializing your actual class, which is data contract class or composite type, which I'm using here. So as soon as anyone uses this method, from their service or from their application, whenever they consume this service, right, then they will have to call, right, they will have to call this output type called composite type, which is data contract, right? So the composite type will have all properties like the encapsulated one. So it will contain all the variables for which each variable can contain each property here. Now these properties are called as data members, right? So in a class which is a data contract class, whatever property here we are actually measuring as data members, right? Only those properties will be serialized, which means only those properties are exposed or filled with value and will be sent to the application. That is something which is data member. We'll actually create one of our customized data contract. Don't worry, we'll see that. Now here you can see this is the interface, right, which we created, which is service contract. Now this interface I will have to use and create a my service class. So let's go to service class, which is my service1.svc. SVC stands for service. Here you can see a globe symbol, which is service, and your service contains your actual service class. So this service class here, service 1 implements your interface 1, which is a contract. So which means your actual service implements your service 1. Now interface concept. So whenever you implement your interface in any other class, right, then what is important? All the operations, whatever you have defined in interface, should be implemented, or the body for the methods, whatever you have defined, should be implemented in this class. So that is something which is the minimum property of your interface. And you can see there are two operation contracts here. One is get data, one is some other contract, right? Both we actually expanded here. And now those methods are ready to consume. Now this is how we normally create the different contracts we have, and we create a simple service class. Now this is a class which is going to be exposed to the outside world. So we'll actually see how. Now here, let's say I have only one method called get data, which takes value and returns a string. So let's go to the method here. Now you can see get data is taking value called integer, and it is returning string. What it is returning, you can see string dot format, which means I am going to send string in this format. Now in string, right, whenever you have something called like this is nothing but a parameter. If you know C or basically C or C++, right? So we normally provide arguments in this way. You have flower bracket 0, which means whatever you mentioned here, which is after comma, will be your first parameter, and this will be replaced here. Right? So that I am actually returning as a string. Now in string you can see this as a first string. Now this is a simple service layer what created, right? As soon as you create. Now we will be using the same service method. We will create our own service method once we see this, how to consume this, okay? Now here let's go to properties. Now we have to see how does it work on iOS, right? Now in application you can see go to web. So in web you can see use local iOS observer. On local iOS observer what we are doing, it actually selected a port, and every time anyone tries to consume this URL will be triggered, and URL with the name of your client. We'll see how it actually gets registered. Now you can see this is my 1194 is my port. So let's close this and let me rebuild this web service. Right. So here what we are going to do now. Now you have your WCF service layer ready. Now let's say it internally got deployed onto IS server on 1197 port. Now let's create a new project. Let me create a console project and let me show you how to consume this. So let me create a new project here. Let me create a console application. Let me call it as WCF consumer console. Right, and let me make it a startup project. Now, first point. So whenever you have a service to be accessed and to be used, right? So always every service will have its own URL. When I say URL, which means the service should have been deployed on the server. That is important. Fine. So now let us see how it actually gets the URL part here. Fine. Now let me right click on this because I have to add a WCF client or a web service client here. So for adding web service client, this is a common feature for any project in .NET. So right click on references and you can call add service reference. See, as soon as you click on add reference, you can see a folder was created named service reference. And here, if you know any URL, you can provide. But if you want to get the URL from your local project, click on discover. As soon as you click on discover, see, it will discover a URL which is on 1194 and the actual service name is service1.svc. That's it, right? And you can select this. You can see this is my service class, right? And you can see the actual service will be generated here as soon as I expand this. Right, this is your service, right? And you can see I'm going to keep my service reference. You can see this is a namespace I have. I'm going to keep this as service reference one. Click on OK. So as soon as I click on OK, right, now you can see your service reference folder will be synced up with service reference, actual service which I'm going to use, and in your references you can see the system dot your service model got created. Now service model is nothing but the actual library on which your WCF runs. Right, this is a base library of WCF components. Fine, and you can see your service references. There is already a mapping to your service. Now let's see how to go. Now here in my console application, I'll show you how to consume your web service. Now, firstly, we know service reference is a namespace, right? So let me go ahead with service reference dot. Now you can see you have something called service1.client, which means whatever name you have here, right? Service1 or let's say my service or anything, right? So your class will be created with service1.client. This is important, right? And let me create an object obj is equal to new object. Now this time what we have to do, we have to go ahead obj.c. As soon as you click on get data, right, and it says integer value. Let's say I'm going to enter 25. Now this is going to return your string type, right? So I'm going to print that, and once it is done, right, so this is going to be a simple consumption of your service. Let's run this. So you can see you have a simple service. Now you can see it actually created a service object, and then now this is my console application. So from my console application I am trying to get my service from web service. Now this is how it can be. Fine. Now this time let's say you are going to give some other number here, right? And enter. Now for your web service will actually work as a centric, right? And your data whenever you change, right? So only that data part will be changed. Right? You can see we have entered so and so value. Now this is something which we have entered. Right? So this is how we can actually create a service reference objects. Now the consumption of service you can see is is easy to actually consume. Now here when you go to app.config, this is important, guys. Now in configuration files, right? Now as I'm using my WCF consumer console is my console application, right? So my configuration file is nothing but your app.config. Now this is important, guys. So your system.service model is something which is important. If you remember, we actually thought of three different things. One is your address, which is ABC's way of communication through endpoints in WCF, right? The first one is address. We have used some address to create a service class. Now B is something which is binding, right? So binding, you can see there are bindings here. Now what type of binding I want to make? I want to make it's a HTTP type of binding. You can see it's a basic HTTP of binding. And bindings endpoint. Endpoint is nothing what you can see, which is my C, which is a contract, right? So that contract anyways I'm using in my configuration called service, which is my iService. Now here you can see if your web service changes, you can always change this address. That's it. The address is always configured. Right? Now this is how you can actually add your endpoint and fine. So here again you can see binding is nothing but your basic HTTP binding, and binding configuration have got some ID. Contract here you can have some ID, right, which are pointing to this, because here we have already made it as a HTTP binding. Now these are important again, which you can actually check. Fine. Now let's go back to the service again. So this is important, guys. This is a binding and your endpoint created. Now if you don't want to create it here, I mean by the auto generate, if you want to create, you can also create that, but make sure you're actually using that for creating a reference. Fine. Now, so these are we can actually. Now let's say I'm going to use my own method. Let me create a method. So here, if you are creating many method, now you have to follow some steps here. First, you have to touch your service contract. In service contract, let me create a operation contract. Right. Let's say here I'm gonna return, let's say string array, right? And here I have something called get books. Okay. So this is my simple operation contract I have. So as soon as I go to service one dot service, right? So as you are not talking to me, I'll right. So here, so this method will actually talk to the actual operation contract is the one which speaks out to your implemented class, right? Now interface is being implemented here, and it actually says that yes, you have to actually implement this. So when you run this without implementing the operation contract which you have defined interface, then it will give you that you have to implement your interface number. Now here you can actually get this, which is a get books here, and make sure you are creating it. Let's say it's public, right? Get books here. Right, now let me create a string array, simple string array as s is equal to, let me create a books here, any books. Let's say I'm gonna take maths, I'm gonna take .NET, I'm gonna take MVC, and so on. Let's say these are my books, let's say, and then return s. See, first I created my operation contract. So as I'm using my data type, right, I don't have to create a data contract now. We'll come to data contract once this is done, right? And then I created my getBooks, which is same notation as my operation contract I created. Now this will not take anything, but it will return my getStrings, right? Now which is same here, and I'm returning it. Now this is a simple service I have. Now let me rebuild this. So as soon as you rebuild your web service layer, sorry, WCF service layer project, right? Now this will, all the classes and whatever changes you have done will be rebuilt and deployed on a IIS server, which is a local IIS server. And now if you go ahead to your WCF consumer class, right, and open it. Now this is my service I have, right, which is my WCF consumer console dot service reference 1. Open up and go to service 1 client. Now you can see you don't have a method called get books. Now how can you get that? So once you have any modifications done in service layer, right, always go to service reference, right click on this and say update service reference. So what it will do, it will actually get the URL and it will go to the URL and it will actually check whether your data is synced or not. Now you can see your data is synced. Where you can see you have the getBooks here. Now let's go back to program and run that. So here, so let me just first implement a line here, and then let's say, see, I'm gonna call string array as values, right, is equal to, let's say, my obj, which is my service reference 1, and we have get books. That's it, right? And now let's print them. Right, your collection is values. Now this is a simple way how you get books. Now these books you are actually getting from your service method, which is your console is talking to web server where your service method is, sorry, yes, where your service method is defined in your service class. Now let's run this and see whether we are getting books names or not. Now you can see for the first time it is creating an object or service, right? Obviously it will take because it has to traverse through the URL you are providing, right? You can, even if it is local, it will connect. Now you can see you have both books and the data element, right? So this is how we normally create a contract, which is operation contract and your service contract. Fine. Now, so here you have a get data, you have a get books, which you have written everything. Now, this is one step which we created where you have an interface method, which is an operation, and then we have created get books, which is a declaration of this, and we updated it and we were able to get the data. This is how the normal contract works, the service layer works, and the actual update reference works, and you can actually take the object of any class, any variable, or whatever you define in your contract, right, will be carried over. Right? Now this is about your service layer. Now let's go ahead and see the WCF, which is, if you remember, in our three-tier application, you have seen the application, right, which is communicating with, let's say, WCF web service, and WCF web service is communicating with your database, and let's say this is communicating to database using entity framework. Now how to do that, right? We know how to communicate between the application WCF now because we have created a binding model, and let's see how to create a WCF integrated with entity framework. Now for this, you can either use a straightforward entity framework here itself in a WCF layer. You can actually install your nugget. Now you can see I can directly go there, right, to my WCF layer, right? As your package doesn't have, installable for other projects, right? So whatever is scope for this layer, it will display. Let's show that. Now you can see you have your entity framework installed. So here what I'm doing, I'm installing my entity framework directly in here, which means it doesn't mean that I can directly use my or create my entity model classes, everything in my WCF layer itself. What I can do, I can create a separate class library and use it here. Let's see how to do that. Fine. So in my WCF layer here, let me right click and add a new project. So which contains, let's say, class library. Now this time I'm going to create a class library. Now class library is something which contains only DLL, which I can use directly, right? You don't have any user interface for this. So let me call it as some WCF, right? Entity layer, right? So where I'm actually trying to communicate. Now see here, we have white layers here. We have a WCF service layer, right? And you have an entity layer. Now first let's create entity layer first. Now let me right click on this and install my nugget packages if an entity framework is not installed. Now you can see, install it. Right, it's done now. Close, and now let's add a entity data model. Now new item here and click on data. So in data I want something called entity data model. Let me call it as service model or college model. Click on add. Now as soon as I click on add again, it will give me the wizard to actually select. I'm gonna select my college DB, where you can see everything is same. Now here I'm gonna create college DB context. Fine. Click on next. Now it will retrieve all the information from my database and I'll select the objects whatever I want. So here you can see you have all the tables, and all the SPs, right? Select them and click on finish. Let's keep the namespace as college model itself. Right, so as soon as we finish, our EDMX file will be created. So EDMX file is nothing but entity data model framework file. One file which will actually should take care of the remaining things here. So let's show that. So now here what is happening is your class library is being created. So let it create a schema for us. Yeah, now you can see these are class diagram. Now it is taking some time. That's right. Now we have created this in our entity layer, right, which is my entity WCF entity layer. Now this is ready to actually get the data, right, where you can see my EDMX file is ready. Now in EDMX file you can see all the objects and everything is ready. Now let me use them all here. Now let me close all. So here in our WCF entity layer, let me create a new class and let's say new. Here right click, new class, right, and let me call this class as simple DAL. Now DAL is data access layer, right? I'm gonna call this class as a DAL class. Click on add, right? So this DAL, let's say, contains few details. So let's say first method, let me create as public. Let's say it will give us let's say something called list of students, right? Sorry. Students, let's say here get students is my method. So here internally what I'll do, I'll call my college DB context, which is my DB context, and then I will call DB context dot students, which is students, and then now I can directly return this, right, because it needs a student list and I'm actually giving a student list here. Now this is how I can create a DAL here. Now DAL I've created in my entity WCF entity layer. Now here I have to use this WCF entity layer in my WCF service layer. How can I use a project in another project? Straightforward, right click on this reference and click add reference. Here you have your projects where you can see something called WCF entity data layer or entity layer. Click on that and click OK. This will actually make sure that your service layer, right, is added with your WCF entity layer. Right. Now let's go to the service. Right. So when I say service, first you have to go to your interface. Let's say I'm going to create an operation contract. Every time you want to do anything, you have to start from operation contract itself, right? This time, let's say I want all students. Now this time, let's do one thing. Let me just take only student names, right? So let me call it as get student names here, right? Okay. So here, what I'll do, I'll actually override. I'll have to override this method, which is get student names here, right? So let me call that get student name here, and here. Now you can see, as of now, I have referenced my project called WCF entity layer here, right? Which is a different project with a different namespace. What I'll do, I'll call that namespace here first, which is my WCF entity layer. Now here I'm going to call the DAL. Now I have created, if you remember, so did I made this DAL as public? Let's make this class as public class, right? If you don't make class public, what happens? The class will become internal class, and this will be applicable only in the same library. But what I'm looking to access this class across the library, right? So that's the reason why I made it as a public. Now let me rebuild this project entity layer so that I can create a new library, and new library will be automatically assigned here. Now here, let me create DAL. Now you can see, you can create DAL. DAL, let's say obj is equal to new DAL, right? and then here I'll say obj.getStudents. This is what I'm getting. Right? This will actually give me all the student names. Now let me call it as var. Let me call students is equal to your students. And here let me create a string array. Let me call it as result is equal to new string array of, let's say you have students dot count. Fine. So I'm creating my string result here. Why? Because I have to write it in my string array. Now let's fill this string array. So let me call for each here as my result, and let add result dot, we have something, no, not dot, result of, right? I'm going to add the strings here. So here let me take int here, int I is equal to 0, and I'm going to call this as I plus plus is equal to I. See, this is how I can add my details to my list here, result. So I'm going to, finally I'm going to return my result, which is my string array. Now this is how I can use my service. Now you can see that I created one more level of service. I created a 3-tier application now, which is my, we created an application which is my WCF consumer console, right? As of now we are actually creating something called console application. We'll go to WCF application, don't worry. Sorry, MVC application also. And we created a WCF service, which is a WCF service layer, and we actually integrate that with framework, and we are talking to database. Now that's what we are doing here, right? It will actually talk to entity layer DAL, and from DAL it will talk to college EDMX and then to database and get the data back. Right now my get student names is ready. Now let's see how I can actually use it here. So let's run this project, which is my WCF layer. So as soon as I run, my new library will be created for WCF. Now it says, you can see, it says that okay. So here we have seen our service, which actually gets our students. Now I have to use this get student names. Now you can see we got an error. Can you see this? It says your web service is not implementing your so-and-so operation contract because it is not public. See, your contract, right? Normally, forget about contract. Whenever you have an interface operations will be a simple return type and a method with signature, right? But whenever you are implementing these methods, right, it always should be public. Fine. Now you rebuild this. Now this is the reason why you should always rebuild your project before actually referencing or doing any other stuff. Now you can see rebuild success. Now which means your WCF service layer is successful. And in WCF service layer you are using your entity layer, which is also successful. Now let's see how to update your console. Now in my console, what I want to do, I want to call my students, right? Now if you want to do that, let me take a string array, right, where I'll say maybe students. Let me call obj dot. See, when I try to call get students, I don't have this. So that's the reason why before using that, what you have to do, you have to update your service reference. So right click on this, update. Now as soon as you click on update, right, it will go to app.config, it will get the URL, and through that URL it will download all the service information we have, right, and all the meta components will be added over here. So here you can see when we say meta components, right, you have something called dot get students. See, you have get student names here now. Right, now let me actually create this stools here, and let me print it up like console.writeLine up. Right. Now see, this is my application layer where I'm using a console application, and I'm calling my web service here, and web service here is in turn calling my entity framework. You can see in entity frameworks, which is a separate project at all. In separate project I have a DAL. In DAL I'm calling my entity framework context, and in entity framework context I'm calling my students. Now this will actually query my database and get the details, which means you are completely fulfilling your 3-tier application architecture. Now this is the best way how we can actually do a program. Now let's run this and see how it actually works. Now we have to get all the student names in a string array, and that is what we are actually displaying. Now see here. Now you can see we got a service. Now it is talking to database, right? So database, it has to get the data and print. Oh, now good. We got this. You can see, if you remember, right, when you are actually using any library in some other project, right, when you are actually using any of your library in here, I mean, which is your connection string or anything. See this error, if you remember, we have already seen this error. So we actually made intentionally not populating this into our project. See what happens here. So we are using my entity layer, right, which is a complete class reference, right, and we added an entity layer here. Now if you go to app.config, you can see this is your connection string. Right, now let's come back to WCF layer. Now if you come back to WCF layer, even your WCF layer will have your web.config. Go to that, right? Your WCF layer will have multiple things, which is like binding, HTTP bindings. You can see, obviously whenever you are getting a service, you have to mention your bindings. That's what I said, right? ABCs. Now B is binding. I'm using my HTTPS binding. Now here you can see that I don't have any connection string. So which means if you are using your library in service layer, we have to make sure that your connection string are, or all the main configurations are also available in this layer. Now let me copy your, let me stop this running, and let me copy connection string. So you can see connection string should always be under your configuration section. Right, so this is where you should have. Now let's run this and see how it works. Now again I updated my WCF service layer, right? Now as I have updated my configuration right here, which is my service layer configuration, right, where I am not getting the data, right? Normally if I change anything from my classes, main service class or anywhere, right, then that is the point where I have to get my details. But here, as I have actually changed my configuration, which is web.config, I don't have to update my service. But you can see that you will see the data will be populated here. What is the data? It says blank here. So let me go back here. Yes, let me rebuild the solution once. Clean solution. Cleaning in the sense it will actually clear everything. All the console libraries, all the class libraries, all the web applications, everything it will actually clean up. Now I'm actually rebuilding the solution. Now when we rebuild, it will rebuild each and every application, and whatever application is referencing to the other project, that referencing will be satisfied here, right? Now let's see how it's going to work here. Now it is still rebuilding. Let it go. So your rebuild succeeded. Perfect. Now let's go to program here. Now you can see I'm actually getting the student names, right? Let me put a debug point here and let's see what we are actually getting. Now I got till here, everything is fine. I got books, get books and everything, and I am actually waiting for this. So as soon as I go, you can see I got 11. Oh, you are having 11, but you can see it is populating null. So there is some issue in our population. Let's go back here and see what is happening. So I created, oh, okay. So we have to use variable item in this students, right? We just made a mistake, right? So what I'm doing, I'm actually getting the students here, list of students, right? and I'm actually, I just printed something wrong. So item dot, I have to use student name. That's right, we just made a simple mistake of getting student name here. Perfect. Now let me just rebuild solution here and done this. So after rebuilding solution, I have made my changes in my class files and all, right? So for reference, let's update the service reference here. So yeah, rebuild is successful. I click on this and say update reference. Now if there are any changes, it will make sure that it will update the meta information of services in my application here, right? So let me, yeah, it says generating client code, everything perfect. Now let's run this and see whether it is working fine or not. So here, so we got a breakpoint here. Now let me show. Now you can see. Now you can see we have all the database. I mean the name of students record. Now you can see all the names you have displayed. Now this is something where we have followed something called three-tier architecture, including a WCF layer, and we are getting something from database directly. Right. So this is how we normally create a three-tier layer actually. Now, here what we have seen till now is we have seen everything as an operation contract and getting, communicating whatever communication we can do through database through entity framework, everything else. Now let's see the last part, which is how to create a data contract, which is very important. Now let's say this time I don't want to send anything as a string array. I want to send more details. In string array I can send only either a student name or anything, right? Now to send them more details I have to use one class object. Now here let me create a class. Actually if I can make my student class as a data contract, that is more than enough, which is in my model class and entity layer. I can make that. But let's not do that. What I'll do, so let me go back to entity layer here and let me get the students. So this is my student class, right? This is my student class. Let me just copy, paste and paste it here. Anyways, I'm not going to use the same class. I'll remove the partial class and let me just say this is not student. Let me call it as student details is my class. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to create only these things, which is my, so these are my properties here I have, which is my roll number, right? Student name and everything. And for each property here, it is not, we should not actually keep them as is. Rather, what we have to do is we have to create a default values. Let's say roll number is 0, and let me remove this get set. We'll actually create the get set later. So string name, have address, we have a phone number, and so on. Right, you have few things here. Now for all these things what you have to do, now these are not data members guys. So this is student details is your data contract. Data contract is something which makes sure that this class is serializable. And what are the members which are serializable are your data members. So let's create a property. Your control RE will create a property, right? Let's say it's a roll number 1. Okay. And apply. Now you can see a roll number 1 got created. Now let me cut and paste at the bottom. So this is your data member, right? So when I say data member, now this is something which is going to be actual roll number for the student details. Similarly, let's go ahead and see your student name. Let me say here, okay, and click on apply. Now see, as soon as I apply, right, you can see this variable becomes private and I'm actually getting the actual data number here. So this one again is a data member here. Again, go to address, control RE, you have apply, and you have an address property made here. Let's make it as a data member. Fine, this is your address. Now let's go to phone number. Let's create RE here, phone number, and apply. Now again your phone number becomes your private, make it as a data member. The properties, mainly you have to make your properties a data member. Fine. And last one is your created data. Let's create OK, apply here, and then you have a created data. Let's make it a data member. Now this is something where I have made student details as a data contract, where whenever I want to send an object of student details, I can send it directly. Fine. Now here let me just create a first student details. Right, is my simple object which I will be sending out. Right, and let's say I'm going to get something called get specific student. Let's say I'm gonna say this, which is my specific student, and let's say I'm going to accept my roll number. So oops, this is my operation contract. A simple operation contract which is going to return my student details, but which student details? For the roll number, whatever I am getting. This is my input here, let's say. Fine, a simple roll number. Now let's see how we can actually map this. Fine. Now here, so let's go back and create a simple program again here, right? Either you can show it here or you can create MVC. So for MVC, we'll create a list of student details and we'll get it. Fine. Now let me create a string. Now here you can see, as soon as we have created a data contract, right, which is my student details. Now this student details is again accessible from my main application program. Now let me rebuild everything. Make sure no issues are there in either web service or my entity layer. So this may look complex, but this is a very simple concept if you can actually go through this video again and again, guys. This is actual working mode of your WCF. So your rebuild is going on here. So you can see, yeah, we got it in there, right? So it says this is not, yeah. Why? Because we have created this, but we haven't implemented it. So first let's implement that. So what is the method here? We have this operation. Let's go ahead and implement. So how to implement this? So first let's take dal, which is object is equal to, you have new dal. Now obj dot, you have get students, right? So get student is something which will give you a list of students. Now I can apply my link here, single, where my r dot roll number, sorry, not student name, it's roll number is equal to my roll number which I am getting. Now this will actually give you a student. See, if you have entity framework, I am actually using my link everything, right, using in my WCF service too, where we have to use student details, right? Okay, this will give us a object of student. So let me create student first. Let me call it test2 is equal to this. Fine. And what I'm going to create here is, let me create student details. See, this is my class. Let me call it as obj student details is equal to new object, and let me assign each property. See, first one is my, let's say, roll number 1 is equal to your roll number I have, and again student, let me just copy all this. So first one you have roll number, and then you have a student name. Let's say here you get the student name, and then you have address, where you'll have address over here, After address you have, let's say, phone number. We'll take the phone number here. Similarly, let's say you have what's the last one? You have create date time, and I'm gonna take create date time, and that's it. And just say return of your student details. Sorry, obj student details. Fine. So this is how we created a simple actual way of doing it. Now here this should be public again. This is important, right? Your method should be public because you are actually using your interface operation contract in your service class, right? So let's rebuild this solution. So now your solution, when you rebuild, right, now your WCF service layer will be rebuilt, and it will actually check if there are any issues, right? If there are no issues, then it will make sure that you are actually getting the data. Now let's see the part here. Yeah, the rebuild succeeded. Now let's go back to program, right? So here I want to get the details. Now here we have to update the service because we have created many data contracts now, right? So let's update the service reference here. So it will update all the client code and everything. Now here, if you go back and see student details, you can see I have to go to service config, service reference dot student. Now you can see that class is exposed. The data contract class is exposed. Why? Because if you are using student details object, which will be serialized from web service and pushed here, right? We should also have a class type which we are going to use, right? So let's say this is some to object is equal to, now this object which is my service object dot get student. Now get specific student, right? Of let's say 1, right? Specific student of 1, which means roll number for whomsoever roll number is 1, I want it. Now after that, let me print the guy's details. So first one is to object dot, let's say, roll number, right? Let me just copy these. So you have roll number, you have student name, right? And then you have address, and then you have a phone number, and then you have a, let's say, create data, right? Now this is a, right? Oopsie, we forgot. Right? We are actually concatenating the strings here. Now we have showing all the details. Now let's run this, rebuild the solution and run the application, and you'll see we will be getting a specific student. Now we are actually using a data contract, guys. We are actually using a data contract where we are mapping everything here. Now here we went a last step, which is actually creating a data contract and getting those details in a separate application layer where my actual user interface is there. I will create my object of that, and then I'm using the details here, right? So let's run this and see. So rebuild succeeded. Now let's run this and actually check out whether my student 1, right, which is my, let's say I have passed my student roll number 1, right? So specific to roll number 1, I have to get the details. So let's see how I'm getting this. Now you can see this is my data contract which I've used, and using data contract I'm able to get the details of. So this is how we use our web service to actually map different things using different operation contracts, different service methods, right, and also data contract and data members, right. Using all this, we are able to actually communicate to the program. So this is how we normally do have an access. Right? Now let's integrate the same thing with my MVC web application. Let me create a simple MVC web application. So let me click on add new project. So here let me create a class, no, let me create a web MVC code, and let me create a WCF, right, application. Let's say it's a basic web application, click on OK. So we are going to just get the data, I mean through WCF, right, we are going to get the data and map it to the screen. So remaining whatever you have learned in MVC and WCF, right, you can actually map directly. I'll show you one instance how you can actually map the things here. So let me create the WCF application first. So here I have my application, right? Now initially what I have to do, I can create a simple controller. Let me create a simple controller here. First let me make it a startup project, and let me create a controller, add controller here. So here you can see let it add the controller. Right. So here I have a controller, let me call it as home. So here I have an index page, right? So let me create a separate action, right, method. Let me call it as students maybe. Now this is my separate action method I have, right? Yeah. So this is my action method which I have. So before actually creating a view for this, right? So let me do one thing. So let's create okay, anyways, I'm going to redirect my action to the students, right? And before actually creating a view for students, let's see how I can actually reference to a web service first. Okay, so let me just right click on this references in my MVC application. I can add my service reference again. This is same again. See, if I have any, I can actually check out. Let's say 994 is the one, right, which I was using now. Let me check on this and click on go. When you click, now this will actually try to download. Now you can see it is available, right? So this is your service. Now you can see you have all the data, like get books, get data, and everything. Click on OK. Now here, which means now your actual service which you are using is ready. Fine. Now let it add the service reference here. So here it actually added, you can see you have your service model being added to the application and your service reference is already there. Right, now let me create a student view here. Right click on this and click on add view. Now this time let me create a strong type view. Right here you're not getting any classes here because you are not actually getting any references, right? Because it's a service reference here. So rather strongly type, let me create a simple add, which is a simple view, and we'll create our own service reference. So let me create a view here. Now you can see you have a view. Now here let me remove this and let me call model as you have. Let's say I'm going to create a list of your service reference, which is your service one second. Sure. So I have to actually get it from my give the fully qualified service reference. Now what I'm giving here, I am trying to get a list of students, right? Now, but I don't have any list of students, details in my service. Now first let's go back to the service here, which is my, let me just close this console. I'm not using this console anymore. Where is the, yeah, this is my service, right? Let's go to IREF service. Now here let me create one more operation contract, which is, let's say, list of student details. Fine. I'm gonna give all, let's say all students, and that's it. Let's create, let me create something called service method class here. So here what I'm going to do, I'm going to take dal obj is equal to new dal, and let me create something called we have a list of, so what we'll be getting, we'll actually be getting students right here, which is student. Let me call it as students is equal to, we have obj.getStudents. So where you get all, but what we need to map everything to the actual this, right? So let me take up this, let me copy this, whatever I'm doing here, and paste it here. But what I have to do, I'll have to make it, I have to map each of my students right in here. So let me create again list of my student details as result is equal to list of student details here, and internally I'm going to add it. But in my for each, let me take it as student. So in each student, in list of students which I'm getting, right, I'm actually getting each, and student details I'm going to add it to the result. Result dot add of my student, which is obj student details. This is very clear now. Now I'm going to return my result. Fine, this is very simple here. Now what I've did, I'm actually getting list of student details, but I have to map data contract, right? My data contract is student details. I'm mapping each student details, whatever I'm getting, and adding it to this list, and I'm actually returning it to the service whoever is actually getting. Now let me rebuild this web service here. So everything is fine. I made it public and everything, and I should be getting this to my web service. So let me right click and update service coordinate here. So now your service config is updated, right? Now let's go to the home controller. So here I'm not going to use any model. So rather I'll directly use. So let's say I'm going to use list of service reference student details. Let me call it as a model. This is my, I'm directly creating this, right, as I have to get it from service, right? So let me first create an object of service, or rather I can directly say new service reference 1 dot service client, right, which is an object dot all students. This will give me, right, all the student object trees. So while we are getting this, it says cannot implicitly convert. So this says it is a generic student site because it is actually converting it. Let's say it is to list, right? So now your model is created and your data is ready, MDL. So let me pump this MDL to view. Now when I go to view, which is my students view here, I have my list of details here. Now let me just operate that in a UL manner. Let me create a UL, a simple user unordered list, and let me create a simple razor So where I'm gonna get my model. So model contains each student, right? So let me make li as here I'm going to give item dot. Now you can see you have your student name, right? Let's build some few things here, and let's say you have right. I'm just taking a chance of getting all, and let's say I'm gonna check something called create data, right? This is what I want to print. Now let me run this controller. Let me run this MVC project, MVC website mainly. Now this time I'm actually talking to web service and I'm getting the details to website, and web service is talking to entity framework, and entity framework is talking to database. Where you can see I'm actually using all the previously it was console, right now I'm using your MVC. I'm talking to each and every layer exclusively. So let's see how it's going to work. Now here by default it will go to home and index will actually route to your WCF. Now you can see I am able to get the data in console, right? In console and print. Now same web service I am using here, right, to get the data and show it on a MVC screen. So let's see how it actually works. Now you can see I got all the data, the SAM, Arun, and everything. So this is how you can connect to your web services and integrate with any user interface you want to any type of application. It can be MVC, it can be ASP.NET, it can be your mobile app, anything. Through web service, yes, anything is possible. Now this is how we can actually connect to WCF services, right, and integrate with any interface you want, and actually. So this is about the WCF concept we have integrating with different UIs like console applications and your MVC.